Good morning. So, from my perspective, follow this illustration. The auditorium is built like how some scholars think a dining room table might have been organized in a living room. We've got an aisle, and it's kind of making a U. It swoops around that way, and a cut down the middle. Does everybody kind of see that? We've got a U shape in this room right now. And it was customary for the host of the dinner to enter from this part of the room and then move to your right. Things were orchestrated towards the right. That was customary. They would enter the room, go to the right, and people would fill in the table along the left. Jesus, as the host, this is how some scholars think it, would have had a responsibility to not take the farthest seat on the right, because that would be for his honored guest as the host. So Jesus would have let, in this case, and some gospels support this, John go first, then he would have followed John, Judas would have followed him, and the rest of the apostles would have circled around the table. Some of us might remember in the gospels that John leans back on the chest of Jesus to ask who he was talking about that would betray him. Does everybody remember that? Well, anatomically, we think John was first, and he would have been in a place to lean back on Jesus' chest, because it was also customary, given that tables were 6 to 8, 6 to 10 inches off the ground, to put their left arm up against the table and then eat with their right hand. So everyone's facing the same way, everyone's back's facing the same way, and they just go around the table like that. Does everyone see it? Everyone's kind of leaning in the same direction. So, Luke chapter 14. If you would turn to Luke chapter 14. I'm going to start reading in verse 7. We're going to make it to 10. Luke chapter 14, starting in verse 7. Some of the principles that Jesus outlines in this parable is about to make sense. Now he began telling a parable to the invited guests when he had noticed how they had been picking out the places of honor at the table, saying to them, "Whenever you are invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for someone more distinguished than you may have been invited by them. And the one who invited you both, will come and say to you, 'Give your place to this person.' And then in disgrace you will proceed to occupy the last place. But whenever you are invited, go and take the last place, so that when the one who has invited you comes, he will say to you, 'Friend, move up higher.' Then you will have honor in the sight of all who are dining at the table with you. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and the one who humbles himself will be exalted." In the picture behind me, Jesus, as the host, took his customary seat at the table and had conceptually friend and foe on either side of him. Because remember Jesus saying, "Whoever I dip into this bowl with is going to betray me." If Judas was to take the bowl, and the Gospels support the mental image that's painted, Judas takes the bowl next, and Judas would have been right beside Jesus to take the bowl if the table was built into this U shape. The message stands that Jesus had the people who loved him, the people who would betray him, at the same table, eating the same meal. It's the same meal that we're about to partake of. He invites everyone to the table. one day, we are all going to be around the same table with our Savior. For now, we take the bread, we take the cup, and we commune with our Savior spiritually because He's here in this room. And He's going to be in these elements that we partake of. But isn't that something? Jesus had all around Him the people who loved Him and the people who would betray Him. To Him, He died for the person who loved Him the same way He died for the person who betrayed Him. Everyone in here, Jesus died for. Could we turn to Matthew chapter 26? Verse 14 of Judas chapter 26. Excuse me. Matthew chapter 26. We're talking about Judas in a second. Then one of the 12, named Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, "What are you willing to give me to betray him to you?" And they set out for him 30 pieces of silver. And from then on, he looked for a good opportunity to betray Jesus. Verse 17, now on the first day of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Where do you want us to prepare for you to eat the Passover?" And he said, "Go into the city, a certain man, and say to him, the teacher says, my time is near. I am keeping the Passover at your house with my disciples." The disciples did as Jesus had directed them, and they prepared the Passover, which is this picture behind me. Those who would serve the table would enter from the center. And then they could freely enter the room, serve, and leave. But that night, Jesus had on either side of him someone who loved him, someone who hated him. This morning, I hope you are someone who loves Jesus. Because he surely loved you. And he loves us enough to give his body and his blood. Those things we're about to partake of, I know they're elements, I know they're emblems. But the severity of the situation is that they are Christ's body and they are Christ's blood to us. Thank you.